Thank you very much for joining this keynote section, number 4. This is Will Ma from Tonghua College. I'm the moderator for this section. We are so glad to have Professor Winnie Mack to present to us on the topic of opportunities and challenges in co-creating a hybrid human-AI mental health ecosystem. To give you a brief introduction to Professor Mack, she is a professor at the Department of Psychology of the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Her research focused on stigma reduction and health promotion, mental health promotion. She received her PhD in clinical psychology at the University of California, Santa Barbara. And she is a fellow of the American Psychological Association, Association for Psychological Science, Society for Community Research and Action, and the Hong Kong Psychological Society. She is named a world's top 2% scientist by Elsevier and Stanford University. She is also a top scientist in psychology in China by Research.com. She also served in a number of advisory groups, including the Advisory Group on Mental Health Promotion for Hong Kong SAR government. She co-founded Storyteller and developed the online mental health platform in Hong Kong. Actually, this is a project, and she'll also be chair for this project presentation for the Jockey Club to Heart Plus project up just immediately after this section, this keynote. And so without further ado, let's welcome Professor Mack.
Hello. I have a tall order, so I want to make sure that you guys don't fall asleep after lunch. And it's kind of warm and wet, right? So first of all, I'd like to thank Tonghua College for this opportunity to share with the audience about my thoughts over the years in terms of how I can integrate digital tools in building a mental health ecosystem. And before I do that, first of all, I'd like to express my deep gratitude to my students, my collaborators, as well as my funding agencies over the past decades. We start talking on building digital tools back in the days when there's still Flash. And for the reason that in Hong Kong, there's a lot of inequities in mental health, and there's a lot of access issues. So that was like early 2000, we start talking about that and then building our first mindfulness interventions. So that was a long time ago. That was like 15 years ago. And all these collaborators and my students are indispensable in making this happen. And also later on, we're going to talk about Toolheart. We also have a great team over the past years supporting us in building a very elaborate and comprehensive hybrid model and system. Just very recently in Lancet, it's published about the disease burden globally. And so currently we have about 1.2 billion people experiencing different types of mental disorders. And that was like a 95% increase since 1990. And especially if we look at the figures, depression and anxiety contribute the largest increase, as well as sharing the largest deaths. But that's only part of the issue. What's more important to me as a clinical psychologist, especially as I would call myself more a community psychologist, is that we always talk about how mental health is not the absence of mental illness, right? It's actually a state of well-being, how we can, as individuals right here, sitting here, realize our abilities, be able to cope with normal stresses of our lives, work productively, and contribute to the society. And with that in mind, digital mental health is only a tool to make that happen, because we do live in real life settings, in everyday settings. And that said, I think globally, mental health, self-care, and access to evidence-based mental health interventions is very largely limited, especially outside of North America and Europe. In Hong Kong, we are a very modernized, very affluent, so to speak, society, but mental health is rarely being talked about. And there's still a lot of stigma around, mental health issues and challenges, and people really do not seek support for that reason. And so I think we need to think about when we talk about mental health, or especially digital mental health, how can we leverage that to make it possible that everybody can enjoy what I call is a basic need as well as a basic right for everybody to enjoy mental health. So in order to do that, I think we need to co-create an ecosystem. And that ecosystem, I would like to look at it as like how about two wings of a bird. We cannot just operate with just one wing and we cannot fly. On the one hand is how can we really celebrate everybody's differences and diversity? And how can we reduce stigma and discrimination in each of the society? It's not just for mental illness, but also for a lot of minoritized individuals. Because of their minoritized status, oftentimes their access to services is even more limited, and their morbidity is even more severe and more worsened. And on the other hand, is about how can we improve mental health literacy and knowledge about mental health as a basic need, as a basic right, and how can we exercise that through different means to self-care, to take care of ourselves, and to have access to equitable and evidence-based practice. Oftentimes, it's not exactly the same analogy, but I would like to use that as an example to make it easier and more intuitive. I would assume that everybody this morning brushed their teeth, right? And you never really think about that. Do I need to, or do I have cavities? So maybe I should, right? Or oh, my teeth is relatively okay, so I can just forget it. This is just part of our habit. It's just part of our daily life. We don't really need to think about it. Of course, there's not that much of a social equity issue, but of course, when we talk about oral hygiene, there is a social equity issue. But what I'm trying to say is that how can we build mental self-care just like brushing our teeth. So it's so intuitive, so simple, so integrated in our daily living, without having to explain why I need to do that, or without any labeling or any stigma behind it. So with that in mind, what are some of the opportunities and challenges in digital mental health interventions? I just like to highlight a few because in the past decades, there has been lots of studies, especially randomized control trial, comparing different types of digital mental health interventions. And I just like to highlight a few, especially meta-analysis looking at this aspect. We actually found that there is a pretty robust medium to large effects, especially for depression, anxiety management, as well as, for sleep insomnia, and also stress, and more day-to-day common mental health challenges. So the effects are actually quite large in a randomized, control way. And what we also notice is that there's very little differences, if at all, in terms of the different types of delivery methods, whether it's a mobile apps or whether it's a web browser version of internet interventions or other means. And more importantly, we also found that there's really very little differences between face-to-face internet-based face-to-face interventions as well as internet interventions, especially in the modality of CBT. So, so with that in mind, we have a lot of tools that can potentially help us to leverage and to increase access and availability. So digital mental health can do that, and also increase our repertoire of different choices that people can choose from. So then to allow us with the autonomy to decide what works for me and what are my needs and what are my preferences. But we also note that in the marketplace, I think earlier we have talked about there's tons of different apps right out there in the markets. And very few actually are tested, or usually they are tested after the fact. after it's been released in the market. And so if we look at some of the recent studies, we found that there's lots of out there, but many claim to be effective, but only very few actually cited scientific evidence to support, their design and also their tools, their product. In the bottom, I just want to illustrate that this is not limited to mental health. In fact, we look at hypertension and diabetes, we have similar observations that basically the medical claims is higher, but then the actual citation or evidence of that particular tool is very limited. So as an academic, we call that research practice cliff, right? It's not even a gap, it's a huge cliff that's going on. So on the one hand, for academic, we try to understand how can we make use of digital technology to innovate the services that we can provide, to different people. But then real world practice, oftentimes what we're missing actually in academic, research as well, is the lived experience are not often considered, and oftentimes is also a kind of an add-on instead of a integrative, co-design, co-creation process, which we'll touch on later on. So given the demonstrated effects, how come, these digital mental health interventions are not more integrated in formal services in different NGOs or in even, government funded services? And how can that be made available to the public so that they can discern what is evidence-based, what's out there that doesn't have the evidence base, so they can choose, with that in mind, how can that better support my own, self-care? So I'm going to talk a little bit about different implementation challenges, especially for service systems and also service providers, especially mostly in Hong Kong, but I think a lot of these situations may apply to other parts of the country or other parts of the world. First of all, I think it comes down when we talk to different providers. I think providers are actually lagging behind in terms of understanding what's the evidence base out there. In fact, when you talk about it, they don't know there's a lot of meta-analysis going on. Now, it hasn't, shown that some different types of interventions already proven or have already been supported to be effective. For example, CBT, transdiagnostic CBT or CBT for insomnia, there's like lots of evidence out there. And oftentimes, because of that, they are very hesitant and resistant to incorporate that into their daily practice. And of course, I think that goes down to whether they know the evidence, and secondly, whether the institution endorsed them to use that actively into their daily practice, or they still assume or expect, the provider to do face-to-face, in-person counseling, more than using different tools to leverage, to support, to complement what they're offering. And then secondly, I think it goes down to we need stronger, regulation and certification and assurance of different digital tools. I think earlier Sally has said there's no regulatory bodies, right? I mean, looking at this in Hong Kong right now, I think it's inevitable that we need to have a stronger regulation and assurance, so then people feel more safe and when they do access different types of digital tools. And that hesitancy also comes down to, I think earlier, Professor Pusi talked about, is about the digital competency. How would that affect also therapeutic alliance if I do, use digital tools? What about privacy issue? How do I manage different risk? And I even have heard of providers talking about, right now, I only see them once every month or even 3 months. In Hong Kong, it's very infrequent in terms of the clinical consultation. And at the time when they leave the counseling room, if I assess them to be safe, then I'm relatively safe myself in terms of risk aversion. But then if I have the tools assigned or, work with, my clients on a daily basis in between sessions, then I'm constantly accountable. I was actually very puzzled by that. Well, you're always constantly accountable to your clients, in fact, regardless of whether you use the digital tools or not. So is how can you actually make use of the digital tools to support you so that you can make greater, better clinical judgment and decisions to support your client's needs. And that's why clinical accountability is very, very important. And so I think there needs to be a service shift, a paradigm shift for our service providers in terms of how can we, increase their familiarity with different types of digital tools and how can they incorporate that into their daily practice. I think it's have to be start off with even during training, clinical training, they need to learn more about how can that be possible, not just after they graduate, then they learn. And also, how can we support, using digital tools to help our service providers in doing better and more comprehensive psychoeducation in between sessions of support, especially in Hong Kong when the sessions are very infrequent, and also booster, how can we support the client after they have, have left their services, they can continue on having a safety net or also some level of support. And how can we let our providers understand that actually there's a lot of convergence between digital tools as well as what you're actually practicing in your daily lives in terms of whether it's CBT, mindfulness-based interventions, ACT, or any other modalities, as also formats. In addition to individual families, groups, there can be other ways such as online interventions that can also support you to serve a wider group of audience. But of course, I think I agree with earlier speaker talking about digital navigators. I think we need to acknowledge that there's going to be extra work and in terms of how do we manage different registration, higher levels of workload, and how can we keep on monitoring and the progress of our clients, and then how can we support, technically as well as clinically in between with clinical digital navigators to support our counselors and providers in doing better service. And finally, I think we also have some conversation about billing and counting, meaning that right now for a lot of service providers, their key the KPIs is the number of sessions that they provide face-to-face, especially in hospital authority in Hong Kong. Anything that is digital or online will not be counted. And that's actually a great deterrent in terms of, okay, if that's not counted, then why am I doing it? And I'm already busy enough. So of course, that's not on the providers only, it's on the service system, not facilitating our providers to do a better job and to do a more comprehensive, repertoires of services. And how can we do that? I think, first of all, we need to incorporate stakeholders in the co-production process. And then earlier, they are not just using available services, but they are actually co-designing, with developers. How can that facilitate them to understand, and how can they incorporate that into their daily practice? Having dashboard, having CMS that is very easily usable for them immediately. And then we also need comprehensive protocols in terms of how do we assess when to do what, basically, and in what type of circumstances, the service logic behind, their whole service system, the contingency, outcome evaluation, and so on. So with that in mind, I'm not going to say, because I noticed the time, so how can we diversify, provider services through the integration of a hybrid model? And how can we relieve the workload of the providers and streamline the workflow so that it just makes intuitive sense? And this is an ongoing process. So besides implementation challenges, there's also the other end, the engagement challenges. For us, as a developer, we also witness oftentimes that people do not uptake, different apps or different interventions and so on. And even if they do, they leave very quickly. The adherence is low. And that always goes down to how can we engage them better, right? How can the tools make them feel that there's understood, there's resonance when I read it's not a generic content, it's something that is personal to me, it's contextualized, design is intuitive, it makes sense, I can navigate very easily without having trying to figure out what is this button for and so on. And then how can we also have a hybrid approach that there's always a human connection and human support, in lieu of the digital interventions that they may be using. And but most importantly, I think all these engagement always comes down to there's a lot of stigma out there. There's a lack of mental health literacy out there. So then people don't use it because they don't think they have a need, especially in Hong Kong. When we talk about, oh, we have a JC Tour Heart platform. Oh, I don't have any mental health problem. I don't have any, I'm not crazy, so I don't need this. And or when we talk to even our students, they said, "Oh, it's only for psychology students. It's not for me. I mean, I'm a science major, so it's not relevant." So I think it goes down to how can we, it's completely off topic to this digital mental health conference, but I think that we need to start grooming our generations that is okay, is in fact is important for us to take care of our own mental health. And so then that becomes a everyday self-care practice that we all have. And then we can also have that self-care awareness to support each other. With that in mind, in 2017, we built a comprehensive platform. It's based on decades of randomized controlled trials and different studies that we have done. And with the support of Hong Kong Jockey Club Charities Trust, we basically put everything together into one system. And so far is in our third phase. We have over 65,000 users. Our hope is that it's a hybrid model at the very beginning. We have online, offline offering. And so people, depending on their preference and needs, they can use it at that moment without having a lot of guardrails, or not the guardrails, a lot of deterrent in terms of how they can seek different helps. And again, at 3 o'clock, our team is going to talk a little bit more about it. And our objective is to bring that to the hands of our users, to empower users to nurture their own mental health and to support each other, to alleviate the common mental health challenges that we face globally, to support them to have regular practice of their self-care skills, and more importantly, to also develop a stigma-free culture, especially in our different college campuses. So right now, at our third phase, we have collaborated with 9 colleges and universities, meaning that we actually integrate our Jockey Club Tour Heart platform with a university counseling services. So in other words, when students come in registered, they have a single sign-on using their student ID or their student email. And then once they do that, we have full disclosure of the informed consent, explaining that you had opt-in or opt-out in terms of providing your information to counseling services. And most students, after they understand the disclosure and all these things, over about 80 to 90% do opt-in. And then with that informed consent, if they do become, have different mental health needs, then we can do more timely referral to counseling services, and counseling services can also be able to understand their clients' progress at our platform. And we also have mental health assessment, so then we can more readily identify risk and also do timely referral if we deem that high intensity services are needed, and then low intensity services through digital means will not be enough. And so we complement that with face-to-face counseling. So like I said earlier, the platform is based on many years of studies that have been published and done. And we put together, it's a full spectrum from mental health promotion, illness prevention, treatments to integrated platform. We test the whole range. But it's not just RCTs, with different types of modalities. We also do a lot of user experience studies. We also do a lot of UI UX research, and those are being published as well. And with that in mind, I just want to touch a little bit on the user-centric development, because as academics, especially as a clinical psychologist, I wasn't taught to pay attention to user experience. Oftentimes, at least what I'm told is that professional judgment is deemed very important. And even when I was trained as a clinical psychologist, I was trained to look for psychopathology through our clinical intake. We're not trained, at least many years ago. I was not trained to look at what are their lives and aspirations. What are some of the things that are, in their lives that are deterring them from living the life to the fullest, like we just earlier talked about. So I think lived experience is very important to understand and then to bear that in mind in our development and in our development of different digital tools as well as interventions. So at the very beginning, before anything happens, we want to understand what are the users' needs and expectations about mental health. What do they think of mental health? What are the problems that they're facing in terms of navigating in Hong Kong, the user journeys and so on? And what are some of the barriers, not just individual barriers, but also systemic barriers as well as structural barriers and facilitators that enable them to seek and not seek support? And so those are the user interviews that we do throughout the whole entire process, even as we speak right now. And also usability testing. We have a team of product designers constantly doing UI UX testing and reiterating each features and functions to make sure that it's smooth and then people understand what's going on. And we also actively co-create with our stakeholders. So one example is that very recently, because we are in Hong Kong institutions, there's a large number of mainland students. And even though they came here and then they adapt to our Hong Kong culture, they do experience that there is cultural differences. And with that in mind, about half a year ago, we start co-creating mini modules online with our mainland students. So first of all, we want to ask them, okay, what are some of the your pain points? What are some of the mental health challenges that you face as you come here to study in Hong Kong? What are some of the things that you want to see to support you? So we go through a double diamond process, diverge, first of all, into discovering what are some of the problems that they're facing, and how can we define more specifically that specific mental health concern. And with that in mind, we developed different mini modules, and then we tested out, and then hopefully in a few months, we'll be able to deliver our first mini modules together with our mainland students. Second thing is, again, not digital, but then we do want to build an ecosystem that is conducive to mental health. So we move beyond digital psychoeducation interventions. We actually empower our emerging adults right in the real life settings by being mental health advocates in their college campuses. So again, we co-create with our emerging adults. And then at the end of the whole process, the emerging adults actually developed a campus mental health handbook, which is a practical guide, to support tertiary educational staff in terms of how they can support them in providing mental health support at the college campus. So again, it's online, offline, everything is seamlessly, integrated into our system. Finally, I want to say a little bit about adding AI to the strategic assets. I think it's inevitable that we talk to our AI bot, almost on a daily basis doing different tasks. And how can that, how can we make use of that with sensitivity and safety? I think a lot of benefits, I won't really go into great details because earlier speakers already talked about it, is increasing access, 24/7. Really reducing stigma because of their minoritized status. A lot of communities and individuals may not have access to traditional services in the communities, but now that with AI or with digital tools, there's more able to do that, even with different languages and so on. And essentially, especially in Hong Kong, it's actually less expensive because it's very expensive. The number of psychiatrists and clinical psychologists in Hong Kong is very limited, and it's usually very expensive in the private sector. So it's actually less expensive, and it's actually ubiquitous. I talk to my AI, and how can we facilitate, assessment and risk assessment through AI support? And then other possibilities and benefits is that how can we make use of AI to make better self-care plans, with our clients? Later on, again, I think our team is going to talk about, we built a AI chatbot specifically built for motivational interviewing. So it's only to build self-care plans and then to set behavioral goals. It's very limited in a sense, but it's important that it is very task specific. It's not a general purpose bot that they can do whatever, everything, but it's very specific so that they can actually, through the AI, bring or signpost them to specific digital interventions already in our platform that is already being tested that it works, so that they can easily leverage and then to be able to do that with a specific self-care goal. And also in our digital interventions, we are also testing different types of coaching. Currently is human coaches, so we do have low intensity psychological officers providing coaching to our students. But then we realize that there's actually a time lag. People can only work so much, right, or for so long. And so we try to compare that with immediate AI coaching. And so then to bridge the session by session feedback. And with that in mind, then eventually with data, we'll be able to identify what are some of the patterns, user patterns and preferences that we can potentially use to look at how can we further personalize our individual our interventions, and what are some of the mechanisms of change, and what are some of the individual differences variables that we need to heed to when we develop different types of interventions. Okay, so this one, I think Ellen is going to talk a little bit more about it, but what I just wanted to highlight is that we have a RCT going on, it's still going on, and basically for all three conditions, we provide digital transdiagnostic CBT. I didn't highlight it here, so all three conditions works. So basically TCBT delivered digitally works, have a good effect size. But what we're actually comparing is AI feedback, human feedback, and a factual summary. So basically just reiterate what the person has just said. Okay, what is interesting is that it's in 8 sessions, 8 modules. You see that AI condition has the highest drop-off rate at the very beginning, from up till 4th sessions. It's actually to our surprise, because we thought that AI will be better. But what is interesting, and then in fact, human condition can retain the most people, at least for the first 4 sessions. But what's interesting is the switch over after the 4th session. We don't know why. We don't know what's going on. We will be doing user interviews. We are still going on with this trial, so the data may change or the findings may change, but at least for now, it's actually very intriguing. And then we hope that to collect a larger sample size to be potentially looking at, is there any possibility of individual differences that we know whether some people will benefit from AI, whether some people will benefit from human, and so on. And we also have LLM, being very flexible, very human-like, and so on. And then it also kind of redefined what is therapeutic alliance. In fact, in recent studies, not conducted by us, but other studies already showing that therapeutic alliance is similar, if not, is similar to human therapeutic alliance instead of self-report. So in that sense that I think it has a lot of potential with LLM and also generative AI, and also more recently with agentic AI that can potentially support humans to make decisions, to provide timely analytics for humans to make decisions. But ultimately, I would say that clinical and ethical accountability rests on human developers, not on AI or any digital tools. And also a study not done by us, but it showed that LLM may not be always better. In fact, but then I want to say that the number of studies is very limited for LLM. It's only 4 RCTs. But what we found is that actually rule-based chatbot performed better, slightly better than LLM. And there's not a lot of significant differences if we look at it. And I think the heterogeneity is huge. So we still need to look at the confidence intervals is large, so then there's a lot of variability going on. So some of the challenges, I think rigorous scientific evidence is lagging behind on the speed of AI development. So we need to catch up as academics, and as well as how can we work with industries and work with our users to understand more about their experiences. And how can we build better data privacy and security breaching concerns, and how can we safeguard, our users in terms of continuous data collection, and how those data being used by different models. And I think we talk about, brown nosing, sycophancy of our AI. There may be unintentional harm as a result. And also we need to build, stronger guardrails. And often, of course, then there's also data drift and model decay that will diminish the performance of a different AI. And I think finally, we need to build economic and infrastructure, especially for resource limited settings, that we may not be able to support AI as much as we want to. And I think these are some of the things that we already know, that because of they highly validate users. And how can we bridge that? As a clinical psychologist, we know that sometimes we need to challenge, our clients to think about things that are differently, and then to do something that is different, to have behavioral change. And how can that be supported? And other things is about cultural biases. I'm going to stop very quickly. Don't worry about it. And how can we, after all, AI only imitate empathy and only have limited number of memory. So it's not real emotions, and it's not really true understanding. And how can we make that be clear, to our clients? And of course, there's also recent studies showing that it's not trauma informed. And so how can we do that to make it better? So, so with that in mind, I think that I want to say that we do not hop onto the AI bandwagon too quickly without considering all these important concerns that I just raised out, and also not to neglect, the decades of robust research on digital mental health. So those are already there. So how can we make it better, or more personalized? So finally, I want to say that we at JC to our heart, we use a augmentation model as well as a hybrid model. So AI is not a therapist. It never was, never will be. Will be assisting in how do we provide triage, psychoeducation, and offer different interventions, signposting them. And with that in mind, human always build connections, engagement, and accountability, and so that we have scalable safety and effectiveness. And from day one, it's already hybrid, so it's not a step care model. So step care is usually very symptom focused. So basically, looking at symptom severity and design, assign different users to different levels of step, and then if they don't respond, then we step up. But for hybrid care, at the day one, we consider their different needs, their motivation and preferences. So then we have continuous engagement and adjustment based on different users. So I'd like to end with this. I hope that I can convince you all that digital mental health is only one part of the whole equation. To build an ecosystem, we need to have human scientific evidence. We need lived experience to tell us what's really happening and how we experiencing our world. And we need structures that support us without stigma and without discrimination. And AI and digital technology only enhance the tools. And I think we need to build a mental health friendly and conducive society together. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much. Please stay here so that we can answer some of the questions from the floor. So any of you have, yes, please.
Oh, thank you very much, Professor Mack. I think this is very impressive, and I particularly like your position summarizing how AI. I'm particularly interested in the AI bit, okay, and the situations. So I've just got basically one question, but on two comments you made. The first is about your comment on the AI model, talking about the phenomenon of AI decay. And another critique about the AI model that is about the emotion is not real, unreal emotion. But I'm considering, because I'm also doing a lot of virtual reality research and reading these papers. This is a very big topic. I think the argument I want to raise, or probably want to listen to your expert opinion, is that nowadays people transiting or interplaying between the real and the virtual world very, very commonly. So what is really real and what is really unreal, sometimes they mix together. And so considering this contemporary phenomenon in this contemporary world, so how would you comment about using AI, or how do you comment the effects difference between using the real emotion or not real emotions, and also how do you compare the model decay compare with humans, surface, there is also decay. So how would you comment on these two phenomena? So thank you.
I think this goes down to a very existential question about humanity that which I probably cannot answer right here within a few minutes. But I think at least for us, we always have human in the loop, meaning that we have a team of clinical psychologists and also mental health practitioners looking at the data and looking at the prompts and looking at the responses of our AI on a basically continuously. And then we adjust and we work with our tech team continuously in improving and then to updating different models. So then I think that's very important. In terms of whether real emotions or not, well, human can have fake emotions as well, and fake empathy as well, service providers. So I don't really have a strong answer to that, but I think it really comes down to, you can see from my talk, it always comes down to, it's not really about the tools or about even providers, it's about how can we build an environment that people can actually really thrive and flourish. And it's not really even limited to mental health even. It's about our own values, as human beings, as humanity, how are we actually want to build a civilization, which I said is very existential and it's very philosophical. But I think it comes down to us as human beings to think about all these questions. And then with AI, which could be a tool to help us to raise our civilization even stronger. How can we make that possible? Because I think humans can also have a lot of flaws and a lot of selfishness and whatever. But I think it really comes down to asking ourselves, why are we doing what we're doing, and at what cost? Human cost. And then if that's the case, then how can we do better, as humanity? So I don't know whether that's answer your question, but again, it goes to a very existential and philosophical question.
Thank you. If your the audience from online can also write down your question now. So long. Whether I need to read the whole from Professor Mac. From Professor Mann to Professor Mac. Yes, right. So you work with Dual Heart Plus project, demonstrate. But I think so long.
Oh, wow,
yeah. About the Dual Heart project, maybe we can delay to the second, because after this section, we still have another section presented by Professor Mac and the team about the Dual Heart, focus only on the Dual Heart project. So maybe we can see whether from the floor. Yeah, another question. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mac. The wonderful talk. I think we have learned a lot from you. I'm Yan from PolyU. I'm just quite interested in the Jockey Club project you just did, and I just have a specific question about that. So basically, the program is for students, right? And did you classify that the service might be different for students have different psychological distress? The first question about this Jockey Club project. Another question is that you mentioned you deliver CBT and mindfulness. So how did you deliver this program for those students? Did you provide face-to-face or online or use AI chatbot or anything? And also I was trying actually, I received the email of your Jockey Club project sometimes, but I was trying to register, but as a staff, I cannot. So I'm not sure if you can, in the future, consider open this also to staff members. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, well, it's again about Dual Heart. Maybe 3:00 can answer some specific questions, but it's actually open to public. So it's just that we have specific collaborations with 9 universities, but it's still open in App Store that you can download and then you can use. And all the mindfulness and CBT are delivered online. And then because we do have collaboration with counseling services, and if we deem that the person need higher intensity services, then we will have referral, and then real life clinical psychologists and counselors will be able to see the person. And if they are not students, then we will also refer them to community services as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe you can change a little bit of the question there. Yeah. In your presentation about the challenges, actually, are there any differences for the different target group or the age group? So the app may be, yes, open to the public.
Right. Well, at least for now, based on our study so far, we don't see a lot age effects. Yeah, we at least in our RCT, we don't see any age effects. So we don't have any strong evidence to show that it works better than what. But of course, the interface may be different. For example, that's why I said like the user experience may be very different. The content of CBT or mindfulness is basically the same, but how people actually make use of those apps can be different. And we didn't really do a specific study on age for that. Yeah.
Yeah, when you mentioned about the promotion of mental health, one of it is digital mental health literacy or mental health literacy. What actually it refers to? So is that any difference when you promote to the Hong Kong, the public that are very different?
Is mental health literacy, what I'm trying to say, and digital literacy is two things. And
right.
So basically especially in Hong Kong, I think we rarely talk about mental health. And then I would suggest that we should start very young, even at kindergarten or even younger, to start recognizing emotions, recognizing we are different. We are a emotion with thoughts and feelings and so on. And how can we express that, with different people? So that's beyond digital mental health. But I think that is very important. And I think we're very lagging behind, compared to European countries and North American countries in that aspect. Oftentimes we just have to suck it up, if we're men, or we just don't cry, or we never cry, or if we're women, you're just too emotional, and you should just keep it to yourself, because that's losing face, and we don't talk about those issues. So I think with that in mind, I think mental literacy is really about how can we raise awareness that mental health is just part of our well-being, and how can we exercise our different ways, to support ourselves. It doesn't have to be CBT. It could be, oh, I just want to listen to music, I just enjoy myself, or walk in nature. That's also part of it. But this is really beyond, this conference. But I want to highlight that without that big umbrella, or without that environment, nothing really works, right? If we just only focus on digital mental health. Yeah.
So thank you very much.
Okay, thank
because
you.
of the time of this section, let's close it here. So thanks again for Professor Mac to share with us. Thank you.